So connected storytelling to me is really a way of approaching content creation that ensures, all of the content you're creating is interconnected and relates back to a core brand narrative, whether it's your, organizational brand or your personal brand that you're putting out into market.
Hi, welcome back to Agents of Change. Excited to have with me today Casey. She's the SVP of content over at Skyward, and she has a very extensive background in all things content, user experience, brand management, basically everything that's at the top of our minds right now as we try to figure out, okay, so what's next? So, with that, let's dive in. All right, Casey, I'm really excited to sit down and chat with you, particularly about this topic today, which is content. We always say that social is changing. Social constantly changes, right? When you think you've got it figured out, the API changes, or the platform itself, or it's bought, or everything else changes. But content is like the one thing that remains the same. Content is king. You have to know what you're doing with your content in order to get the audiences. But we also know that the content landscape has evolved. It's changed over the years. I mean, shoot, it's even changed in the past 6 months of what it is that we're being asked to do and what we're asking our clients to do too for us to have this content. And you had mentioned on an earlier call about this evolution of content and how it's really becoming more fragmented, and would love to just kind of dive into that a little bit more as to why is it now considered fragmented.
Yeah, so I think the fragmentation of sort of the content landscape overall is really a byproduct of a couple different things. So your natural kind of market dynamics and then changing consumer behavior. So obviously people are spending more and more time online. We've seen as a result of that the expansion of platforms, social as you just mentioned, like blowing up in particular. Um, and those are really, new platforms, new channels, all aimed at like capitalizing on that time that people are spending, right? So all of that choice is causing this kind of user diffusion to happen. People are splitting time now between more platforms online. They're doing more platform switching, as they're researching or completing tasks online. And so what we see now, from our perspective, working with a lot of brand content marketers, is they're challenged to diversify their marketing and the number of channels that they're on to effectively like reach that scattered audience. So I think it was 2023 HBR reported that, there were like over 2/3 of marketers were saying they were expanding the number of channels that they were on. So that's just like symptomatic of this. Knowing that, right, those platforms are doubling down on the features that they're offering to like capture that brand marketing revenue. So now you have that expansion of like platforms within platforms. So TikTok Shop, LinkedIn podcasts, like Facebook events, the list goes on and on. So there are all these new ways that we can market and create content within those platforms. And that creates some major challenges, I think, for marketers who are creating content, because there's this pressure now to like be everywhere. But it's not like your budget and your resources are, doubling every 6 months to be able to support that kind of expansion. And then there's also, the messaging aspect of this. I mean, it's changed essentially the buyer's journey. It's not linear. I don't know that it ever really was, but now it's definitely much more like a spider web, like a network. And so we have to help brands figure out like how do you develop a content network that can then accommodate that behavior in a really kind of controlled and purposeful way. And that's hard. And what we've seen sort of on the brand side is in the face of that complexity and that demand for content, a lot of content marketing departments have like fallen back to a support function. So they've become like an order fulfillment center, churning out like marketing content instead of being growth drivers and practicing strategic content marketing. Right. So that's where, our brand Skyward comes in. We're trying to guide marketers kind of out of the woods here with new technologies and, the strategic blueprint that's needed nowadays to kind of navigate this new reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love that you kind of brought it to the fact that they're now being asked to do different things with this. What our content marketers were originally asked to do has changed. And so that means that the content itself is changing. So how do we bring that back, especially when we're thinking our content team has to be able to do XYZ, but they also have to be able to reach these diverse audiences. And with everything else that's kind of blowing up in that space, how do we get it back?
Yeah. So, I think some of the things that we're practicing is one, strategic atomization. So, this idea that in order to support all of these different channels, you need to be able to create content more efficiently and effectively. So, not thinking about, you know, working in siloed channel teams who are each like executing against their own strategy, creating their own content in this sort of vacuum. We have to get back to connected storytelling. We have to get back to leveraging, creating core assets that are enforcing and reinforcing our specific topic authority in the market, and then being really strategic about how we can repackage that content to make it and useful and contextualize it for different audiences on different channels. Um, and I think that that means, we're having to also like break from traditional marketing practice in a lot of ways, like not putting all of our eggs into one or two maybe baskets and relying on those specific channels to drive the same results that we've seen in the past. Like it's just not going to happen anymore. Um, yeah, I think one of the best things that you can still do is focus on your organic content, right? Like your owned properties, let that be your core. And then everything else is sort of, smart activation. Um, but, I think you guys are experts in this. Like when you're marketing on all these different platforms, you have this challenge of showing up authentically on the platform. You can't go in like a brand and sort of use the same sales tactics on social media with, ads and stuff like that. And it's not that people are just flat out rejecting brands being on social media. It's that like you're welcome here, but show up like one of us, right? Like
Right. Well, they're more aware of the brands trying to sell to them
yeah,
versus just trying to have conversations.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. So you have to work hard to like personify your brand, to show up
Yeah.
like a creator, like a peer, wherever you are.
Mhm.
And I think that goes for, search, social, like so many different platforms. You can't market to people, you can't broadcast to people, right? You have to create a two-way conversation and content is really like the core way to do that.
And I think you touched on this a little bit, but would love your expertise and more of your insights here. Speaking about those content creators, we've got, when you think content creators, there's many different visions that come to mind, but it can be everything from our TikToker to LinkedIn B2B newsletters. So how does this, when we're thinking of atomizing content, how does it impact these content creators, and really how can they solve this in a fragmented content landscape?
Yeah. So, I think one, it's worth noting the difference between like atomization and repurposing, right? Because the two are conflated. So repurposing typically involves like if you're a creator, for instance, taking a piece of content or something you've created from one platform and sort of like verbatim placing it in a bunch of different places. Atomization really involves taking a piece of content, usually, maybe longer form, and then breaking that down or adapting it into new like bite-sized assets, like using the original as the basis of information. So like taking an article that you've written and turning that into an explainer video, an infographic, like eh, reformatting it, recontextualizing it. So I think that this challenges, creators to think about one, the different formats that they need to sort of templatize and use on different platforms, and then plan differently, right? So plan, okay, what are my core asset types going to be? And then how can I efficiently break those down into these XYZ components that I know my audience is going to love? And what's really cool is now, generative AI has opened this whole new gateway into doing that really efficiently and effectively, like if you're using generative AI in the right ways. So, yeah, I think those are
Yeah,
really
absolutely. And that brings up a really good point too when you're thinking about the planning of this. And it's important for us as marketers to also think about where we're putting things, the order of that, and then also how does this content all come together. One thing that you had mentioned in an earlier conversation that we had had was also the importance of the audiences feeling that same content when they're on. And I think this goes back to that atomization that we were talking about. You can have those pieces, but you have to use them differently, but it should always feel like it's the same person. So, when we're thinking about the essential piece of marketing that we have to be present on multiple platforms, then how do we find that balance between maintaining the quality of the content and then also being able to reach those audiences in that space?
Yeah, so I love that you asked that question because the quality and versus quantity debate has been going on forever, and I feel like it's really just created this false choice. Like the reality has always been you need both, right? Like quality to ensure that wherever you're putting content, you are actually engaging your customers or your audience in a way that makes a lasting, positive impression, whether that's like their lives easier or inspiring or entertaining them in some way. And then quantity is essential because you have to ensure you're visible, that you can compete at scale. So I also don't buy into like we're focused on quality only and then no one's seeing your content, right? So for me, like quality is the core, it can never be compromised. It's non-negotiable. The problem is, I think, how people think about quantity. So what we see, on both the brand and creator side is this like quantity equals volume, right? Like 1,000 individual articles. It doesn't have to mean 1,000 individual pieces. It can mean 100 exceptional pieces that are each, going back to the atomization point, atomized in 10 different ways to make them more meaningful and relevant in a certain context or at specific points in a customer audience experience or their life cycle. So it's really going back to that strategic atomization being the way to effectively like execute on that vision on a connected storytelling vision and creating a multiplier effect to hit quantity.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And I love that you use that example as a way because I think a lot of times everybody gets stuck in the idea of, well, we have this content, we have to use it, we have to use it, we have to use it, we have to put it here and we have to put it here, and that's not true. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. Let's think about what it is, which I think just leads perfectly to this next point where we're talking about the connected storytelling piece
Mhm.
and where we're weaving those narratives across all of these different platforms. So, can you walk us through a little bit of how you define connected storytelling and really why it's important for marketers in this digital age right now?
Yeah, so I think this is essential. Like, so connected storytelling to me is really a way of approaching content creation that ensures, all of the content you're creating is interconnected and relates back to a core brand narrative, whether it's your, organizational brand or your personal brand that you're putting out into market. So, some of your listeners may be familiar with like that book, The Red Thread, or the Red Thread concept in marketing, right? And that's really like what we're talking about here. Like your core narrative, your overarching narrative really stems from your purpose in the market, right? What value are you bringing overall? What's your unique value proposition and your point of view? And then all of your content should tie to the major themes or subtopics that concern your audience related to that overarching narrative. And what that does, that I think is really essential right now, is ensure that you've got a steady drumbeat of topics and areas of expertise that you are bringing into market. So you're becoming known as the expert in a few things versus trying to be, everything to everybody and capture, a bunch of eyeballs by talking about all sorts of stuff that's sort of tangentially related like to what you do, which I think SEO has been guilty of doing for a while in some cases. But this is really critical right now, right? Because like authority is so important to becoming known for something, like standing out in a crowded landscape. And as you know, like the marketing landscape is insanely crowded right now. It's never been easier to like create content, and everybody's throwing it out there. So you better carve out your niche. And with connected storytelling, you're really saying, this is my niche, and everything you're doing is tying back to that and drawing people back into your brand. So it's giving them clarity about what you do. And that's giving your all of your content a real true like purpose in terms of telegraphing your brand to your audience and connecting in a more meaningful way, connecting and creating emotional and logical associations between what you're talking about and what you do.
Well, and I just love how you kind of put that all in a very relatable way for all of us that are deep in those trenches, trying to figure out this content map. Can you think of any campaigns that come to mind, anything that you worked on or have seen where you think they had a really good connected storytelling?
Yeah, so I think, I think of connected storytelling as something that's like always on. So campaigns can be a part of that in terms of, maybe you're emphasizing certain stories at certain times because of what's going on in the market or what's going on with your audience or what's trending. But in terms of brands like doing this really well, I think of brands, we've worked with Tom's of Maine, a Colgate subsidiary, and they understood really early on, their niche was eco-conscious consumers and the purpose that they wanted to serve in the market, which was helping people embrace, natural living habits through their products. And so they created content experiences across every channel that focused on educating people about like three things essentially: natural ingredients, natural hygiene, and sustainable living. And those themes are consistent across all the stories they're creating in different mediums, whether that's like ingredient focused tutorials that are suited to YouTube, sustainable living tips that they push on Pinterest, UGC content about, people talking about why they switch to natural products. Like the list goes on, but I think that's the type of drumbeat and multi-format reinforcement that we're talking about. And then on the B side, I think of companies like Drift is an example that comes to mind. And you're familiar with them, right? So their core narrative actually centered on like a concept of conversational marketing. And they coined that concept and brought it to market. So they almost created a new category by being the experts on educating people about conversational marketing and its impact, but they chose to tailor that to three specific audiences. So it was like sales, marketing, and customer success. And like their core assets was they wrote a book and they created these big long form playbooks, and then everything was diffused out of those playbooks. So I think it was a really smart way to scale their content marketing early on, and they become successful at being known for conversational marketing. So, congratulations. But I think brands that are
It's
doing,
worked.
yeah, exactly. Ding ding. The brands that are connected storytelling really well are the ones that we associate with specific things, the ones that are known for something. And that association is forged by creating content that consistently, tied back to their area of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I love both of those examples. We've talked about children before. I'm very familiar with Tom's. It's all my daughters use, so very familiar with their ad campaigns and everything else. And that actually kind of leads to this next point, where we were talking about the alignment between your content with your mission. And so when you said Tom's, that was kind of the first thing that came into mind because we all know Tom's is a natural brand. We understand what Tom's mission is. If you've seen anything about their marketing, it stands out to you. But for some of the other marketers, B2B marketing, for instance, some of the other clients that we work with, it's not as clearly defined as just having it on a tub of toothpaste. So, how, when we're thinking that purpose led content matrix and really getting that alignment, how does incorporating that purpose into your content creation really contribute to that identity for a brand?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's essential, it's how you establish your brand identity, right? Like we were just talking about. by consistently tying your content back to your brand purpose, you're telegraphing to your audience that, like, hey, this is what we do. We specialize in this, and this is the position that we're trying to fill in your reality. So it gives you, from a marketing or content creation perspective, like the frame, right? You have a solid frame, and your job, I think, in content, if you're doing it strategically, is to, stay within that frame. So you can always call back to, when you have your purpose defined, is what we're talking about here delivering on that purpose? Is it helping serve this purpose with our audience X versus audience Y? So you can filter through your different audience segments and say, how does this purpose connect to them? What are the challenges that this specific audience is facing with regard to, the problem, overarching problem that we're here to solve for them? And then you have both, relevance and tailored content creation, but it's still carving out a specific identity and associating with you with something very specific, like in their minds.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. And do you have any ideas or advice steps that these brands can take when they're thinking about this purpose-led content and the strategy for what that looks like in their content and messaging?
Yeah, so, when we're engaging with clients, we have what we call, a content blueprint that we kind of help them set up to both keep connected storytelling, really like reinforce that strategically across their strategy, and then, to inform the outflow and the atomization process. So, like, content creation, how we're going to handle that. So the first step, there's really like five essential steps, and the first step is what we just talked about, like knowing your purpose, making that the North Star of your storytelling framework. So what's your purpose as a brand, and the point of view? This is really important. What's your unique point of view that you're bringing to the market? So, for Tom's of Maine, that was helping others live a more natural life, right? Below that, the second step is, okay, you've got your core purpose. Now establish your pillar themes. So these are the areas where you've got, specific value or expertise to offer your target audience. And it's often like three or four sort of major challenges that they're facing that relate back to what you do as a brand. So the major challenges that you're helping people solve. And then step three is mapping out how those themes touch each audience and maybe industry segment that you're targeting. And that's giving you, when you think through that, you're getting the subtopics that you need to hit on with your individual content pieces. So your outflow of content is tying back to your major themes, which is tying back to your overarching purpose. And then there's another step that I think sometimes gets overlooked, which is, mapping out the key moments. So thinking about topics also in terms of timeliness. What times of the year is this challenge maybe more prevalent for my audience, or is it a better time to introduce like this particular topic, or maybe launch a campaign? And then fifth is sort of the tailoring and customization aspect of everything, which is mapping out your key channels and formats. So considering each audience, where do we need to reach them? What formats should we be using to have an impact? Like, how do they prefer to consume content on this channel? And you can templatize those elements so that you're creating core assets that tie back to your major themes, and then distilling those and dropping them into your customized assets at the sort of like channel activation and audience level.
I like that. And as you were talking, kind of going through all the steps, I almost am envisioning like a snowman of, the three different parts of a snowman, but that makes up the entire snowman. So you need all three to have everything that you need. And then the content mapping, in my little version of it, is his hat.
Yeah, I love that. I
But
love Yeah, I'm very visual too. So it's, sometimes it's like, think of it more of a pyramid or like a house. But I love snowman. I haven't heard snowman yet. So I might take that.
maybe it's winter that's got me thinking, I don't really know.
That's awesome.
But on that topic of winter, I mean, when we're recording this, it's in February. This was big predictions time. Everybody has a prediction, whether it's when Taylor Swift is going to do her next big album, or anything in content, we've seen all the predictions that are out there. So what are some of the emerging trends and some of the predictions that you see in the year ahead? And then also, how does that tie in with the future of content marketing?
Totally. Yeah. So I think to me the most obvious one is the infusion of AI, and especially generative AI in mass, into existing tools, into new tools that we're using for marketing and for content creation. And that impacts, content planning, content creation, and personalized distribution. It's sort of touching all of those different areas that we care about, right? Um, Related to that, I think the more that consumers are interacting with generative AI. So a lot of listeners, maybe you as well, Danielle, have used like ChatGPT and that open chat interface, right? To like maybe help with writing or like asking questions on the side. I think we're going to start to see people really adapt to that type of experience and interface, and therefore see like brands starting to their owned property experiences, like thinking websites starting to be shaped in the form of more conversational interfaces or sort of open search interfaces. So you're taking that, right? You're taking that work out of navigating through website menus, and it becomes, hey, we specialize in content marketing. What questions can we answer for you about content marketing today? And boom, the content that we've created as a brand is served up for you really dynamically and almost like a conversational style. So I think that that's maybe like longer term reality, but I think people are really latching onto the simplicity and the ease of, conversational interfaces today. And so I think that's never going to have an impact on like the types of experiences they want to engage with. And, sort of potentially an unfortunate aspect of the whole acceleration of generative AI is I think we're probably going to see almost like a bifurcation of brands, with some brands starting to like double down on growth hacking and using AI to like create a bunch of AI generated content and get it out to market. I don't think that's personally gonna serve them very well in the long term. I believe in using AI for adaptation, but not like original content creation. It's just not there yet. It cannot rival giving creators and experts in terms of like providing in-depth insights and like true quality. But those who do continue making investments in sort of thought leadership and craftsmanship and using AI to support that in really smart ways, I think are going to be the longer term winners. But those are sort of my AI oriented kind of hunches right now.
I love, love, love the idea and the thought of that AI interface website. And so that's for me personally now something that I'm sure I'm going to be on the lookout every time I'm going to a website. Like, can I tell? How did they create this? So that'll be a fun one to watch for sure.
Yeah.
So, when we're thinking about all these different ideas and where we're headed in the market space, what are some key takeaways for content creators that are navigating everything that's happening from the fragmentation within the content landscape to everything that's happening on social right now? How can these individuals and these brands really implement that strategic and adaptable approach?
Yeah, I think a few things come to mind, some that we talked about in terms of like how you're planning and approaching storytelling. So taking a connected storytelling approach, like developing your topic pillars, defining what it is that you're the expert in, and doubling down on that. Don't create those in a vacuum, um, but really own your niche and make sure that you've got a niche, because that's going to be really important. The noisier and more fragmented the landscape gets, I think, navigating the landscape also. And I got sort of inspired with this tip by Sofia Hernandez, who's the head of global business marketing at TikTok. She recommends like if you really want to master these different platforms, study what the creators are doing. Right. So individual creators, influencers on these platforms, their little ways of creating narrative, of capturing attention in unique ways, unique, maybe quirky, like storytelling, kind of techniques. Study those and, get inspired by those and adopt that into your own strategy. And I think the other big thing is sort of operationalization. So the operational side of this, which is you've got to become more flexible as an organization. And we work with, bigger enterprise brands that have, big, often siloed like channel teams and things like that. And a lot of them are trying to execute on content creation with a, group of full-time employees. And I just don't think that relying on solely in-house team for content creation is sustainable in this environment with the amount of content that's needs to be created. So using technologies like generative AI for adaptation and atomization, specifically adopting an atomization sort of mindset, but also changing the way you work and you structure your team. So a freelance creator network, like you need flexible resources to be able to tap into, to be able to flex and accommodate the demand for content creation that's coming out. We have to be thinking more like hybrid workforce versus rigid FTE, or rigid like 20 different agencies, each of them doing something different, kind of model. You need to have your core partners that you can trust to test and experiment with. You need flexible resources, and you need like a process for change management and testing, sort of intern. So I just think thinking about preparing your organization to be truly flexible, is really important.
The key term, be flexible.
Right?
Like the number one thing for us all to take in the year ahead, just be flexible.
Exactly,
I
exactly.
think that's going to
I
save everybody's sanity.
So much change even over the last year. I mean, we saw so much change and disruption. And I know a lot of
Mhm.
marketers who are like entering January and like, here we go again. Like it's
Right.
probably more. So yeah,
Exactly.
buckle up, you know. But when you have partners that you can trust to test with and to guide you, right? Like trust the experts. Like we specialize in content. You guys are the experts in social. Like trust your partners and work with them on what you should be testing, what you need to be adapting to and doing. So you're not chasing shiny objects. You have help focusing on what matters, because not every change is going to be relevant to your business. Not every change is going to, matter to your audience. So like know what's impacting your audience so that you can go there and not, chase everything that's coming up.
Yep. Yep.
So
Absolutely.
flexibility and
Absolutely.
focus. Avoid distractions.
Just shut down everything. It's
Exactly.
true. Well, Casey, I appreciate this, and I feel like we could have had a 2 hour long episode and still not covered everything. But
Absolutely.
we sincerely and deeply appreciate your thoughts as we try to figure out what what does it look like going forward and where do we go from here, especially as we're thinking of our content mix. So appreciate your candor and your insights, and hopefully everybody is taking this into their next marketing meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Danielle. Appreciate it.